Hey everyone, what's up? Welcome to another video here on the channel. Today, we're going to take a trip back in time, back to an era when games didn't go easy on us. You know that feeling of spending hours, sometimes days, trying to overcome a boss or a specific level, with the controller already sweaty in your hand? We're going to talk about the Super Nintendo, a console that marked an era with unforgettable classics, but which was also the stage for some of the most brutal challenges we've ever seen. Forget the tutorials, the checkpoints around every corner, or the automatic saves. We're talking about a time when difficulty was part of the experience, testing our patience and skill to the limit. We've prepared a list of 10 games that for many were real endurance tests and that, in a way, helped shape us as players. So grab your imaginary controller and come with us to remember the SNES titles that destroyed many people's childhood. Super Ghouls and Ghosts represents the pinnacle of cruelty in SNES platform games, a title that transformed frustration into an art form. The game puts Arthur, our medieval knight, on an epic journey to save Princess Prin Prin. But the basic mechanics of the game are already a nightmare. Just 2 hits to die, and when you're hit, you lose your armor and become vulnerable in your underwear. The feeling of helplessness is constant, especially when you're running desperately in your most fragile form, knowing that any touch means starting over from the checkpoint. What makes this game truly diabolical is its weapon and progression system. The weapons you collect aren't always useful. Some are practically useless in certain situations, creating moments of despair when you pick up a spear when you needed a dagger. Arthur's jump control is notoriously stiff and imprecise, making platforms that should be simple become exercises in millimetric precision. Every jump is a gamble, every movement a decision that can instantly cost your life. The level structure is built to cause maximum psychological suffering. The game features enemies that appear from all angles, projectiles that follow seemingly random patterns, and platforms that crumble at the exact moment you need them. The zombies aren't just obstacles, they're elements of psychological torture, rising from the ground when you least expect it, forcing you to maintain a constant state of paranoia. The level, The Ghoul's Stomach, is particularly cruel, with its unstable platforms over infinite abysses. The cruelest aspect of Super Ghouls and Ghosts is its true ending mechanic. You must complete the game twice consecutively to see the true ending. This means that after hours of suffering to reach the end, the game simply says no, do it all again, but now in hard mode. Battletoads and Battlemaniacs arrived on the SNES carrying all the sadistic reputation of its NES counterpart, and managed to be equally cruel with a more polished 16-bit look. The game starts deceptively friendly. The first moments with Rash and Zitz feel like a traditional beat-em-up, with punches, kicks, and fun transformations that recall the Ninja Turtles. But this honeymoon lasts only a few minutes before the game's true character is revealed. A relentless sequence of challenges that test not only your reflexes, but your mental sanity. The infamous Turbo Tunnel returns in this version, and remains one of the most brutal segments ever created in a platform game. The section where you ride a motorcycle at high speed through obstacles that literally appear out of nowhere is an exercise in pure memorization. There's no skill or strategy, just the need to die dozens of times until you memorize every curve, every barrier, every exact moment to dodge. What should be exciting becomes a torture session where every mistake means starting over from the beginning of the level. The variability of the levels, which should be a positive point, becomes a constant source of anxiety. Each stage presents completely different mechanics, from hand-to-hand combat to precise platforms, from high-speed racing to complex puzzles, but they all share the same cruel design DNA. The game never gives you time to master one mechanic before throwing you into another completely different one, creating a perpetual feeling of being out of your comfort zone. The cooperative system should ease the difficulty, but Rare's developers managed to turn even cooperation into a source of frustration. The standard mode allows players to hurt each other, turning cooperative sessions into constant accidental battles. Unlike the others, Super Castlevania 4 fooled you in another way. It gave you power. For the first time, Simon Belmont could use his whip in 8 directions, swing on platforms, and even control his jump in the air. Compared to the rigid control of ghouls and ghosts, this felt like a luxury. The gothic atmosphere was dense. The soundtrack is still one of the best ever composed for a video game, and the first stages, although challenging, seemed fair. You felt like the ultimate vampire hunter, a capable and prepared hero. The difficulty here didn't come from limited controls, but from meticulously cruel level design. The famous knockback from the series was present and more dangerous than ever. A small touch from a weak enemy near an abyss meant instant death, and Konami's designers exploited this to the maximum, placing enemies like the annoying Medusa heads in perfectly calculated locations to push you to your death. The game required a slow and methodical approach. Running was suicide. Every step, every whip crack had to be deliberate. There were phases that became legendary for their difficulty. The Clock Tower, a series classic, was a nightmare of moving platforms, pendulums, and Medusa heads. But for me, the phase that stands out is the rotating dungeon. The entire scenery rotated, completely disorienting the player, while spikes and enemies appeared from all sides. It was an impressive technical feat for the SNES, but also psychological torture. It was a test of patience, where haste resulted in certain and frustrating death, forcing you to restart a long and arduous section. What differentiated the difficulty of Super Castlevania 4 was its pace. It wasn't the frantic speed of Contra or Battletoads. It was a slow and growing tension. The game taught you to fear every dark corner, to respect even the most basic enemy. Donkey Kong Country 2 is a fascinating case. The first game was challenging, but this one raised everything to a new level. It presented itself with pre-rendered graphics that are still beautiful today, a melancholic and unforgettable soundtrack by David Wise, and a darker and more adventurous atmosphere. The gameplay felt familiar, but the addition of Dixie Kong's abilities, with her hair that allowed her to float, gave a new layer of depth. The beginning was inviting. The pirate ship phases were brilliant and everything seemed like a natural and welcome evolution. Where the game showed its true claws was in the design of the more advanced phases and, mainly, in the search for collectibles. Finding all the DK coins and secret bonuses wasn't an optional challenge for completionists. It was necessary to access the true final world, the lost world. And these secret phases were brutal. Phases like Animal Antics, which required mastery of all animal friends in sequence, or Screech's Sprint, a deadly race through a maze of thorns, were pure skill tests that took hours of practice. The phase that personifies the difficulty of DKC2 is, for most, Toxic Tower, a vertical phase where a deadly green liquid rises rapidly, forcing the player to climb using Rattly, the snake. The precision of jumps, the necessary speed, and the presence of strategically positioned enemies created immense pressure. A mistake didn't just mean losing a life, but being swallowed by the slime and having to restart the agonizing climb. And the thorn phases, the bramble stages, with their winds that altered your trajectory, were equally infamous, requiring delicate and precise air navigation. The difficulty of Donkey Kong Country 2 was rewarding because it was intrinsically linked to exploration and mastery. The game encouraged you to be curious, to look for false walls and to try seemingly impossible jumps. Including Super Mario World in a list of difficult games may seem strange. After all, it's one of the most loved and accessible games of all time. Reaching Bowser and finishing the game is a relatively calm and pleasant journey. Nintendo's genius was creating a welcoming experience on the surface, full of colors, fun secrets, and fluid and delightful gameplay, with the addition of Yoshi and the Cape Feather. The game invited you to an amusement park, and most of the rides were safe and fun. However, the true difficulty of Super Mario World was hidden, waiting for players who decided to seek 100%, or at the time, the 96 exits. The path to this went through the Star Road and finally, through the dreaded Special Zone. And here's where the game took off its smiling mask and revealed a sadistic face. The 8 phases of the Special Zone were a brutal test of all the skills the player learned. Each one had a suggestive name like Gnarly, Mondo, Outrageous, and of course the infamous Tubular. The experience of trying to complete the Special Zone was a shock. The same game that gave you open phases full of possibilities suddenly presented you with death corridors where one mistake was fatal. The difficulty wasn't gradual. It was a quantum leap. This created an interesting duality. The main game was a celebration of exploration and joy, while the post-game content was a hardcore challenge that tested the limits of patience and skill. The frustration was intense, but the reward, seeing the game world change color and getting some Goombas with masks, was a status symbol at the time. Super Mario World taught a valuable design lesson. It's possible to create a game for everyone. It offered an accessible adventure for most, but didn't forget about players seeking an extreme challenge. It didn't destroy childhood in a general way, but certainly caused nightmares for those who dared to uncover all its secrets. Contra 3: The Alien Wars was pure adrenaline in cartridge form. From the start screen, with its heavy music and explosions, the game established a tone of incessant and desperate action. You were thrown into the middle of a city in ruins, invaded by aliens, and the only instruction was, shoot everything that moves. With an arsenal of iconic weapons like the spread shot and the laser, and the ability to carry two weapons at the same time, the initial feeling was one of chaotic power. The game was a visual and sound spectacle, a true 16-bit blockbuster. The difficulty of Contra 3 is legendary and multifaceted. First, the screen was constantly full of dangers. Enemies, shots, explosions, parts of the scenery collapsing. There wasn't a second of peace. It was a true bullet hell before the genre became popular. Standing still meant dying. The game demanded constant movement, spatial awareness, and extremely quick reflexes. Furthermore, in normal or hard mode, a single shot was enough to kill you, sending you back to the last checkpoint without your special weapon, which made recovery almost impossible. The game also broke traditional gameplay with isometric view phases. In these moments, the control changed drastically, requiring the player to use the shoulder buttons to rotate the character. This abrupt change was disorienting, and many players hated these sections. The fight against the boss at the end of the first top-down phase, a wall with mechanical claws, was a coordination test that filtered many players. And the bosses of the side-scrolling phases were spectacles in their own right. Gigantic, with multiple phases and attack patterns that filled the screen. The experience was one of pure stress and exhaustion. Playing Contra 3 was physically draining. Your thumbs hurt, your eyes burned from trying to keep up with everything on screen. Death was so constant that it became part of the learning process. Zombies Ate My Neighbors was different from everything at the time. With its B-horror movie aesthetic, its peculiar humor, and its premise of saving innocent neighbors from classic monsters, the game was immediately captivating. The variety of weapons was hilarious, from water guns to cutlery and soda cans. The non-linear gameplay, with huge maps to explore, gave a sense of freedom. At first, it seemed like a fun and comedic walk through horror scenarios. The game's difficulty revealed itself in a subtle and growing way. The problem wasn't killing the monsters. It was resource management and growing chaos. The keys to open doors were limited. Your most powerful weapons had scarce ammunition. First aid kits were rare. And most importantly, you had to save a minimum number of neighbors to pass the level. Letting a neighbor die not only weighed on your conscience, but could also mean a game over if you lost too many. This constant pressure to find and protect neighbors while your resources dwindled was the real source of stress. The phases became progressively more labyrinthine and full of enemies. Levels like Dracula's castles or infested malls were a nightmare to navigate. The radar helped, but often it showed a neighbor in an area you didn't have the key to access, forcing you to take huge detours while listening to screams of terror. And certain enemies, like the Chucky dolls, Killer dolls, or the Chainsaw Maniacs, were incredibly resistant and fast, capable of destroying your health bar in seconds. The experience of playing Zombies Ate My Neighbors was one of constant anxiety. Every step into an unexplored area was tense. The sound of a neighbor screaming, "Help me!" from the other side of the map created immediate panic. Made by Virgin Interactive, which had a reputation for creating Disney movie-based platform games that were surprisingly difficult, The Lion King was the ruin of many children. The game was absolutely beautiful, perfectly capturing the animation and color palette of the film. The music was fantastic. Playing as young Simba was fun, and the roar mechanic to paralyze enemies was clever. The first phase, the Pride Lands, was a perfect tutorial and a wonderful introduction to the game world. The brutality began in the second phase. Can't wait to be king. What started as a colorful and musical phase turned into a platform nightmare. There was a puzzle section with monkeys that threw you from side to side, requiring perfect timing. One mistake sent you back to the beginning of the sequence. Then came the ostrich ride, which required pixel-perfect precision jumps. For a child who just wanted to relive the magic of the movie, this phase was a concrete wall. Many simply couldn't get past here. And if you managed to survive the second phase, the game continued to punish you. The Wildebeest Stampede phase, where you ran towards the screen, was a memorization and reflex test that seemed completely unfair. Later, as adult Simba, combat became more important. But the range of your attacks was short and enemies, like hyenas, were aggressive and difficult to hit without taking damage. The difficulty didn't seem well designed. It seemed artificial, made to extend the playing time of a title that would otherwise be short. The frustration with The Lion King was particularly bitter, because the game was based on a beloved property. Children wanted a fun adventure, not a patience test that made them want to throw the controller at the wall. Mortal Kombat 2 arrived on home consoles as a true event. It was bigger, faster, and more brutal than its predecessor. The digitized graphics were incredible, the number of characters was impressive, and the addition of multiple fatalities, friendships, and babbilities made it an immensely attractive package. At home, with friends, it was an infinite source of fun. The problem started when you decided to face the single-player campaign, the Tower. The artificial intelligence difficulty in Mortal Kombat 2 is legendary for being shamelessly cheating. The AI read your inputs. The moment you pressed a button to kick, the computer already reacted with the perfect counterattack. This made offense almost impossible against more advanced opponents. You were forced to adopt repetitive and boring tactics, like waiting for the opponent to jump and sweep, because any other approach resulted in severe and immediate punishment. The last two opponents, Kintaro and Shao Kahn, were the pinnacle of this unfair design philosophy. Kintaro was a four-armed monster that could grab you in the air, and his attacks dealt an absurd amount of damage. Shao Kahn was even worse. He had attacks that were almost impossible to block or dodge, like his shoulder charge and his ascending hammer. He constantly mocked you and seemed immune to attacks that worked on all other characters. Beating him seemed to depend more on luck and exploiting AI flaws than real skill. The experience of playing against MK2's AI was a lesson in humility and anger. You could be a master at the game against your friends, but the CPU made you look like a beginner. The feeling of injustice was palpable. It wasn't a skill versus skill challenge. It was you against an opponent who knew your moves before you even made them.
Johnny Cage wins. Round 2, fight. Johnny Cage. Round 1, fight.
F-Zero was a launch title for the Super Nintendo and was designed to show the console's power, especially Mode 7, which allowed scaling and rotating the background to create an impression of 3D. And it did this spectacularly. The sense of speed was something never before seen on a home console. The music was futuristic and energetic. There were no weapons, just pure high-speed racing. It was a visceral and exciting experience. F-Zero's difficulty came directly from its main feature, speed. The vehicles were extremely fast and light, and the slightest touch on the side barriers or another pilot could make you lose control and ricochet across the track, losing all your momentum. The tracks were full of tight curves, ramps, mines, and magnetic areas that trapped you to the barriers. Mastering drifting and knowing when to use boost, which consumed your vehicle's energy, was essential for victory. The game was merciless. You had to stay in a certain position each lap to not be eliminated. Falling behind meant the end of the race. Furthermore, your vehicle had an energy bar that decreased with each crash and each boost. The only way to recover it was to pass through a pit stop area on the track, usually located at a strategic point. This added a layer of resource management to an already frantic racing game. The combination of high-speed, treacherous tracks and severe punishments for errors created a steep learning curve. The frustration in F-Zero was the kind that made you hold your breath. A perfect race could be ruined in the last second by an unfortunate crash. The most difficult tracks, like Mute City 2 or Firefield in expert mode, required almost perfect memorization of every curve and obstacle. There was no margin for error. The feeling of being thrown off the track after leading the entire race was heartbreaking and controller breaking.